The real beneficiaries of financial fair play are owners of football clubs. These owners have stated very publicly that they support financial fair play. It seems obvious that the reason is because it increases their profitability. My name is Stefan Szymanski. I'm the Stephen J. Galletti Professor of Sport Management at the University of Michigan. I've been interested for many years in the economics of sports. Well, there are two fundamental relationships which determine the outcomes of league football in Britain and in the rest of the world. One is the market for players. Spending on players translates into team performance, into league position. The second relationship is the relationship between success, where you end up in the league, and the revenue that you generate. Although we think of fans as being very loyal to their clubs, actually teams that are more successful attract more fans, and teams that are less successful tend to lose fans. Teams may underperform, and that may then lead them to get into financial difficulties, just as occasionally some teams outperform and do significantly better than you'd expect over some time. But on average, teams break even. And that's the equilibrium that has existed in European football for 50 years or more. Financial fair play is an attempt to break up this equilibrium and turn clubs into more profitable enterprises. And the way they want to do it is really by limiting expenditure on wages. So the rules of financial fair play require something called break-even. The amount you spend in terms of wages and player transfers is equal or no more than the amount that you receive in terms of ticket income, broadcast revenue, sponsorship and merchandising. Up until now, many clubs have been receiving subsidies from their owners who are willing to spend money because of the prestige associated with owning a football club, and financial fair play essentially outlaws that. So it will have two effects. It'll have a direct effect. There are no more direct injections from the so-called sugar daddies like Roman Abramovich and Sheikh Mansour, which will reduce spending on players. And an indirect effect, because even if you're not in breach of the financial fair play limits, the amount that everyone else is spending has gone down, and that reduces the cost to you of buying wins. Because everything is relative in football, it's how much you can spend compared to everybody else. So if everybody else spends less on average, then the opportunity for you is greater. And that will then also tend to reduce spending to the extent that some of those clubs put the money in their pockets. They take a profit and take that money out of football. Together with Thomas Peters, I have an article in the current issue of Economic Policy, which estimates that the effect on reducing wages will be something in the region of 400 to 800 million euros. That's a very significant drop in player spending. In the short term, it shouldn't look very different for the fans. So the clubs will be hiring the same kinds of players. It's unlikely to affect ticket prices or the cost of watching football in general. One problem possibly in the longer term is that we may see an ossification of the competitive structures, meaning that the same teams will continue to win year in, year out, and it will not be possible for small teams to suddenly rise up and compete in the way that, for example, Manchester City has risen up to compete with Manchester United in recent years, because the sugar daddy option, the way of getting new money into the club, will no longer be there. One of the problems about financial fair play is it's meant to address the problem of insolvency, but in fact it's unlikely to do so because it's really only affecting the very big clubs in Europe, and most of those big clubs actually don't have financial problems. There are only about 77 clubs in Europe that have a turnover in excess of 50 million euros a year. Financial fair play only refers to clubs whose losses exceed 5 million euros. So you can see that there are very few clubs that are likely to be caught by this. And a good way to understand that is to say that in England, something like 80 clubs in the 4 professional divisions in the last 30 years have had insolvency proceedings of one form or another. However, only Portsmouth, that's the only team that was in the Premier League that has ever started insolvency proceedings whilst in that league. And even then, they were just on the verge of relegation. But mostly, it's been clubs in the second, third, and fourth tiers that have had these problems. These clubs are really not affected by financial fair play, so it's really not going to have any impact. It's very interesting to look at the stated objectives of financial fair play, which are actually written into the regulations themselves, which you can download from the UEFA website. They talk about increasing efficiency, increasing discipline for the clubs. It's going to take money away from the players and put it into the pockets of the owners. It's not clear why that's a fair thing to do. And it's probably not going to do much to increase the financial stability of football, of most football clubs in Europe. So it's really hard to see how it's got anything to do with the stated objective of fairness. The real beneficiaries of financial fair play are owners of football clubs. These owners have stated very publicly that they support financial fair play. It seems obvious that the reason is because it increases their profitability. It seems to be just a transfer of money from players to owners. So it doesn't seem to really have any positive effects. Financial fair play is actually being challenged under European competition law, and it seems quite reasonable to think that that challenge has a pretty good chance of succeeding because there are no real benefits that you can identify for the fans of making football better.